How about we start with Saundra? Saundra, I want to know, what did you bring?
Well, I brought, sorry, just disappeared. Oh, here it is. I brought pictures. Can you see my screen?
It's coming up. It's coming up. Boom, there it is.
I brought pictures of my brother, Norman, who we were so close. We were, I was born in January, he was born in September. And we were very, very close. He was deaf and he passed away in 2020. But he's always in my heart everywhere I go. He's doing the sign right there for I love you. Yeah. And I bought 2 pictures of my son, Nelson. This is my favorite picture of him. He's in his element. He's outside. He's in the water at the beach on his birthday. He's just the happiest dude ever. Aww. And this is a picture that we used when I had some interviews on television when he was in the hospital with COVID. And this is a totem that he bought me when Nelson was very small. When he was young, he was very small. He was very short, he was very light, and he was very fast. And he could run like nobody's business.
Roadrunner.
And so when he went to, he was homeschooled for a while. And so for a science trip, they went to New Mexico, from Maryland to New Mexico. And when he got to New Mexico, someone gave him a totem and said that he was a road runner. And so when he brought this totem back to me, and I've kept it ever since. He was about 13 or 14 when he got it. And he brought it back to me, and I kept it with me ever since. And it just reminded me of just how fast and carefree, he was.
Oh, good. We're gonna hear more about both your brother and your son. This is, well, you can already hear this is gonna be, I think, a really powerful, maybe emotional conversation. Thank you, Saundra.
You're welcome.
Wakako, what did you bring?
Okay, I am screen sharing as well. I brought a picture as well. Boom. This is me when I was 15, and then you can see the phone. And you can tell how old I am by just looking at the phone, right? And then this is my little cousin who is 11 years younger than me. Yeah.
What's your cousin's name?
Dan.
Dan?
Mm-hmm.
Dan.
It's like in English, it's probably more like Dan, right?
Dan. I love it. So we're going to hear more about Dan and that phone in just a moment. But I, first of all, just wanted to say thank you to the 2 of you for joining me for this episode of Not Quite Strangers. And for anyone else that's tuning in, my name is Valerie Hope. I am your host. And this is an opportunity in this podcast to bring 2 people together who have not quite met, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, but also to inspire your curiosity and the curiosity of my guests, build connection, and more than anything, disrupt the status quo and what it's like to meet someone or get to know someone that you don't know very well, even better. That's the purpose. I brought these 2 very special ladies today because I've had the fortune of, for almost 8 months, 9 months work together. We all took a course with heroic public speaking so that we could hone our craft and build a message that was meaningful. And in that process, I got to know the 2 of you quite well. I would say quite well, or at least very intimately. There were some of the stories that you shared with me and with the rest of the group. And as I spoke to the 2 of you, I realized an instant connection between the 2. But I realized that the 2 of you haven't spoken tons about, I don't think, some of these topics, perhaps, but I had the sense that it would be a great conversation to have on this podcast. Specifically, Saundra, you shared, and this is part of the speech that you were working on, you've been working on, is the journey that you took to be as an advocate for your son's life during the time that he was diagnosed and treated for COVID, and his passing too, and everything that you went through. Was such a relevant, timely message, and one that I really found that you had a lot of courage to think about and work on this message so shortly after everything that you'd experienced in his, before his death, but also in leading up to that. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for allowing me an opportunity to have that conversation with you in this platform. I think it's going to help a lot of people. And yeah, I couldn't wait. And then Wakako, for you, I just thought, okay, when you shared, and I think it was only in a really small moment. There was a moment you and I were practicing, and I asked you a few questions about why that message was important to you. You obviously have a message about helping parents that have children with ADHD or different neurodiverse children. And I kept asking you, like, why? What is it about that? What is it about that? And you shared a story about your cousin that I think will resonate for Saundra, because I don't know if Saundra knows this story yet.
No, she doesn't.
Oh, see, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is it. These are the two. Anyhow, so before we jump into all of that, I thought, it'd be great for people to know why you said yes to being on the podcast. We talked a little bit about it earlier, but this is not a story or not a conversation that you've had with each other, and probably much less in this type of platform. So I'm curious about why you said yes to sharing. Saundra, let's start.
Well, like I said, because you asked me so nicely to do it, and I thought when we met at HPS virtually, I thought that you were a great person. I wanted to get to know you better, and the only way for people to that don't already know the story and find out about the story is for me to talk about it. It is difficult, it is painful, but I think that people need to hear it. Some people need to hear it, and hopefully it will help people. My son was very much about helping others, and so I want to honor his life by doing what I can to help other people advocate for themselves when they're having health issues, or have someone in a family advocate for them, because sometimes you can't advocate for yourself. But so I am trying to come out of my comfort zone a little bit and do things different, do different things that I've never done before. So actually, I thought this was a wonderful opportunity, and I really appreciate you asking me. So thank you.
Anytime. I will wait. Keep your thank yous until the end, just in case. No, I'm kidding. We'll have fun. We'll have fun. Thank you, Saundra. And Wakako, would you like to share why you said yes?
Yes, it's just about the same as Saundra. I need to, come out of my comfort zone, right? And then this was a perfect opportunity that I know you, and I know how good you are. You were the only person who got this story out of me. I really haven't told many people about this. And then the way you ask questions, and you have something magical, and then I know Saundra's story just a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, why not?
Okay.
I mean, this is so out of my comfort zone, but I'm going for it.
Step out of the comfort zone. I love that message. Well, I appreciate the trust that you put in me in sharing this. And then also, I do think it's both of you have such a powerful calling. I think that's really what I heard and saw in our conversation that I thought would be a meaningful conversation to have on this podcast, is because both of you have been called to share a message. And I thought, hey, if I have an opportunity to not only provide this platform for you to share the message, but also to inspire each other in the process of doing so, then let's go to it. So let's talk about Saundra, you brought your photos of your brother and your son. Tell us a little bit more about what they mean to you. What was it about your brother and your son? And obviously both of them passed last year in 2020.
My brother passed in 2020, and my son passed in January of 2021, on January 6th.
Oh boy. Okay. So very recent. What can you tell us about them?
Well, my brother Norman was born deaf. Even though my mother had all of her vaccinations and everything, she still got exposed to rubella. She worked in a lab. Maybe she got exposed there. We're not sure. But he was born at a time when there were lots of rubella babies in the United States. And he had some issues with learning and just, being deaf and being Black and having health challenges. So I grew up, with all the big sister, not only just big sister, but big sister of, a brother that was disabled. And his biggest threat, he used to be a really skinny little dude, but as he got older and bigger, he was, pretty big. And his biggest threat to people was, I'm going to tell my sister.
I could see that. That's how he would bully people in the playground. Until I tell Sandra. What's the age difference?
About 11 months.
11 months. Okay, so you said you were born several months. Okay.
Very close. But just even something as simple as, going to McDonald's and him and the people, well, now COVID, you do everything in the phone, but then, in the 60s and 70s, going up to the counter and going through the process, well, what do you want? And having an assigning, and the person behind the counter being, hurry up. I'm like, no, everybody else took their time. We're going to take our time, Or if he asks for a visual menu and they're giving him a hard, and I sometimes I would let him go and I would just kind of stand in the back and just to see how things were going. And, he'd ask for a visual menu. You have it written down, and they would act like they couldn't read it, or what do you want? Or, just being kind of rude. And I would put up with it for as long as I could. And then I would go in and say, this person is disabled and this is not how you're supposed to be treating disabled people. You have visual menus for a reason. And, just trying to educate people kind of in a little bit of a rough way. Because they were hurting his feelings and being mean. We always gave them the opportunity to do the right thing, but people didn't already always do the right thing. And then as his health declined and he got more and more ill, there was more advocacy that I was doing for him, like in hospitals, at doctor's offices, all kinds of places. So he died on May 17th of 2020. My mother's house, he was actually over at my house here the night before, a few hours before actually. And I was fussing at him about, staying home and not catching COVID. And then at about 3 a.m, he texted me about getting some diabetic supplies for him. And I was kind of annoyed, and I thought, I almost texted him something back like, why don't wake me up again? But then a couple of hours later, my phone rang and it was my son saying that the house was on fire. And we went around there because I bought a house near my mom to help her with my brother. And we went around there and the house was in flames. The flames were shooting out the front door. There were helicopters, there were police cars. I couldn't even get near the house. We had to park, and I kept trying to tell myself, stay calm and just walk down there, but I ran. And my son and my husband and my mom and I stood there watching the house burn, knowing that my brother was inside, and it was really hard. He lost everything. He lost everything. So for me, that's really when the story started, because when after the fire they moved, my mother and my son moved into a two-bedroom apartment. And fortunately, thank God for the Red Cross, they came and helped me get medication from my mom and dentures and things that she needed. But she went from having everything to nothing, and lost her son. She didn't even have a pair of shoes on. And my son did go back into the house after he got my mom out to try to get my brother out, but he said the smoke was too thick, and he actually had, some burns on his face from being in the house and trying to get my brother out. And unfortunately, they weren't able to save him. He didn't survive. And then a few months later, that was in May, and then in September, my son came down with COVID.
Man, there's one tragedy after the next. Saundra, I'm so sorry to hear that. I knew about your son. I had no idea about your brother, and it's a tragic accident. This is recent, right? This is still fairly fresh.
It really is.
And I'm just out of curiosity, what is the emotion that you carry now? I know that you're a warrior woman, right? You're here as an advocate, right? That's what you were like, boom, I know my purpose. This tragedy is taking you towards a path to a calling, but I'm curious about emotionally, how are you processing all of that? Or how did you process all of that?
I'm still processing it. It's still, it was very traumatic. Both of the deaths were very traumatic for me. And so I actually went to grief and trauma. I got a grief and trauma therapist after my brother died, because all my life I've lived, I went away to college and been to Europe and stuff, but all my life I've basically been in this neighborhood, and there's a firehouse right up the street. So I'm used to fire engines. But after the fire, one day I was coming home and a fire truck came down the street, and I started screaming, and I couldn't remember my way home, and I was in my neighborhood. And I told a friend about it, and he's like, you really need help and you need grief and trauma therapy, which most therapists are not trained in. And so he was very helpful in helping to find me someone that could take me right away and do it virtually. So and my husband is great. And the people that I work with, can I give a shout out to my school?
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right, Key School, Escuela Key in Arlington, Virginia. They were wonderful. They were wonderful. I mean, they were so supportive. They sent us food. They sent us just all kinds of things, blankets, just love. Brought me, little things from school all the time. It was great. People came to visit, or even if it was just outside the door to say hi. And I just appreciated all of that. And then a few months later, my son got sick, and I had gone back to work. But so the grief and trauma therapy, my family, my husband especially, my school, everybody getting together and supporting me has really been very, very helpful.
Huge.
And not watching a lot of television, not watching the news, what was happening, politically, was also, I think, a good move on my part, because it kept me from getting, triggered all the time. But it really is. It really has been very difficult.
Yeah. Oh, I can only imagine. And I want to actually ask Wakako, what would you like to say? I see you nodding, and obviously you've heard some of this before probably, but I'm curious about what's there for you.
Yeah, I was like, it's one after another, right? That just is so, I don't know how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I found another connection to you. My sister, she's blind. She wasn't blind from birth, but she was diabetic because of her genetic thing. And then at the age of 30, she lost her eyesight.
Oh, wow.
And then she lives with my parents, and she's doing great. But I was like, oh, imagine that.
Yeah. Another connection.
Another connection.
Right. Yeah, that's your little brother,
disability,
right?
diabetes.
Right.
Yeah.
And no, but it sounds like some shared experiences. I do want to say one comment, Sandra, and I remember in one of the groups where we were practicing in the speech writing course that you would ask to go, I think you asked to go last or something like that. I think that was the thing.
Oh, she always did.
She's like, and I'll go last. And because, and I don't, these were not your words, but this is how I remember it. You were saying something like, because when I give the, when I give my speech or when I practice my speech, it kind of takes the air out of the room or something like that people are like, I don't know if I want to talk about taxes or, or joy or, recycling after you share. So I laugh now, but I just remember how responsible you felt for the experience and the listening of everyone else. No one asked it, no one requested it, no one expected to, but I can see I saw your tendency to want to care for other people. In just that small moment, I could see your commitment was to make sure that everybody else was okay. And I appreciate that. And I think told you, like, that's not necessary. We're big people. We don't need that. But thank you. I appreciate that generosity.
Yeah.
Well, I understand, and some people had very strong reactions to some of the things that I wrote, and I was having a strong reaction, and I just keep it inside. You can't really see it, but I didn't want to respect people's. Some people had some very light, subjects, and I wanted to let that go on and get out there, get them a chance to practice that, because some people were affected by it.
Oh, no doubt. Well, we're gonna continue to dig more. Wakako, let's turn to you. First of all, share a little bit more about that, your picture with Don, your cousin.
Yeah.
And also, what about him made him so special to you?
Yeah. So he's my cousin, and he's 11 years younger than me. So I've known him, I've babysat him, and I've known him ever since he was a baby. So, he's more like my little brother. And that picture right there, he's like 4. And I love little kids. So, I was just playing with him, and then he came to visit, and it was summer, and then he just, got so tired, and he was on top of me, and then he just fell asleep. And, I just kind of remember that, and so what happened was, as we grew up, we lived in different cities. But when I went to college in Tokyo, which was where he lived. And I lived across from his house. So I was there all the time. I was like eating dinner there. I was doing the laundry there. I was practically there like all the time. And then I would go back to my room just to sleep. So, to a point where he thought I was his sister. he had a sister, but, like he called me sis. And yeah, so he didn't understand, the cousin but anyway, so I was there, and then I was the only one who was interested in Nintendos and all the comic books, like what was that? What was it? The Dragon Ball. It's a huge comic book. Okay. We shared the same interest, and then I would go out and then buy those books for him because he didn't have money for it, and we would just hang out all the time. So we were really close. And and then I went off college, and I went on my way, so we kind of parted. But he stopped going to school, I think, when he was like 5th grade. And I would hear these stories from my aunt, and then from my mom, and all of that. And then he went on without going to school. You could graduate middle school in Japan because it's, I don't know, obligatory. and then he went to free school. It's like outside of the school system. It's like a private school where they don't really teach academics that much, but they might focus more on, skills and
Life
such.
skills.
I don't know. Yeah. And then they live in this dorm and they live together. So, and then he went to high school like that. And then I knew he was doing not too bad. He wasn't regular go to a company every day and then earn salary type of guy, but I think he was making enough money. And then I live in Colorado, but my family lives in Japan. So every summer I would take my two kids and go to Japan for like 2 months, except for the last 2 years. But every year I would go there for 2 months and then spend time with my family. Now, 4 years ago, I made that trip, and then I got to my mom's house, and the kids went to sleep, and I was with my mom alone, and then she drops this bomb on me, like, well, I wanted, I was waiting for the kids to go to sleep, but your cousin just killed himself, and we found him right when you were on the plane. And
like that same day.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he did it there, right then and there, but I think it's been a day or two before they found him because he was living alone. So, but yeah, I'm jet lagged. I came all the way over and then boom. And yeah, and it didn't really occur to me that he had ADHD, and it didn't happen chronologically, but 4 years ago that happened. And then there was all sorts of what if I did this, what if I called him more, what if and then and then I always think about that, and then life happened, and I got really interested in kiddos, helping out kiddos and families with ADHD and autism. And as I learned things, all kinds of things started to reveal itself, and then it dawned on me, like, oh my gosh, that had a lot to do with my cousin's, what happened to him, ADHD and all of that. And then now that I understand it, my drive to spread the word, the message has gotten even stronger, because and then I have to watch out, because in my mind it's like, oh, you leave this alone, he's gonna die, and then I go into that, but I kind of have to, I've learned to settle myself down. But yeah, that's what happened, and that's why I'm really passionate about spreading my message.
That message was done on the spectrum. Was he on the autism spectrum?
No, I don't think so.
No, ADHD.
But I think he definitely had that. Although, it was before such diagnosis was readily available. So
what was it that you saw or heard or learned that made you so passionate? Like, what was the piece that lit that spark for you?
For my interest?
Yeah, your interest in wanting to educate and advocate.
I started working at preschools, and the only reason was because I love little kids. And then because my kids were still in school, it was easy for me to work in the same school system. So we had the same vacation, all of that. So that was the only reason why I started doing that. And I was a substitute. And then as I go into different classrooms, I noticed those kids, who were not quite fitting in. And I don't know, I'm fascinated by how they work, how their little brain works, and then how authentic they are. I feel that, I think. And then the more I noticed them, the more I was with them, it was apparent that it wasn't the best environment for them, even though I know, all the teachers are doing their best, and then, they mean well, but, school environment itself, there are so many kids, there are so many distractions, and then, you can't possibly be paying that much attention to each and every one of them. And then that's when I was like, no, this is really not helpful. So that's when I started to really dig in to what can we do? How can we do this? I don't know, but yeah, that was my drive.
Yet another connection, school. Because Saundra, you teach English as a second language, correct?
Yes, I teach English learners.
English learners, that's what it was.
That's what they're calling it now.
Okay,
Yeah.
English learners.
Yeah.
What's your reaction, Saundra, to what Wakako shared? I don't think you'd heard her story either, right?
No, first of all, you really do have my condolences. I'm so sorry. I know once you're close to someone and you have that connection, it's hard to live without them. So it's interesting now that you can see the ADHD in other kids, just, that you're, just an observer or a substitute, not just as a substitute, but, without anybody telling you, I'm assuming that, this is the diagnosis or this is the issue with this child. You probably can, you're probably very sensitive to it. And we need that, teachers need that. We need other people's opinions and their insight. I think that's really helpful. I don't know, it's hard to see students in a situation that's already set up, and as much as you try to do for them, as many services as you try to provide and as many supports as you try to put in, every situation is not for, or every child is not for that situation. And trying to find some place that's the best setting, for that student can be difficult sometimes.
Oh yeah.
And you might be seeing things that the teacher doesn't see, or maybe even the parent doesn't see. So I imagine that can be both rewarding and kind of difficult sometimes.
Yes.
That's so interesting you talk about this, because my mom literally a couple days ago shared, she's been on this kick. There's a documentary that was released, I guess this past week, called The Wisdom of Trauma. Have you guys heard of this?
Oh my gosh, I translated that into Japanese. I put Japanese subtitle.
You did?
Movie. Yes, volunteer. I volunteered. And then I had no idea how hard it was. So it took me like 3 weeks.
Wow. Okay, now I have to go back. I have to go back and look at it, because I watched it and my mom watched it. And then there was also, throughout this past week, they were interviewing the two the executive directors of the film, put together panelists and speakers and all sorts of really interesting activities and exercises on a virtual platform, where they talked about how trauma manifests itself. So my mother volunteers, well, she doesn't volunteer. She's, I guess, like a substitute, if you will, in schools in Alabama. She goes to different schools, works with primarily grade school through middle school age students, different schools at different times, and mostly with Spanish speaking students. So she's there to support them and make sure that they are getting what they need. If they need a translator for something, or if their parents need some additional support, she's there to be an advocate. My mom likes to call herself a community advocate. And she said recently that when she watched that film, she just realized how many young people were just so deeply traumatized by life. School is just another place for them to either get re-traumatized, or someplace that they're not able to get the needs met, and therefore their performance is impacted. But that trauma from whatever it is at home, whether that's, some family issues, whether that's health, whether that's mental illness, there's all sorts of issues. But she realized that, there's no way that schools or teachers themselves are prepared to handle the trauma that many young people face. So I'm curious about the two of you. Both of you work with young people or in school systems, and you've obviously had your own traumatizing experiences. What are your thoughts on how trauma impacts how kids learn or operate, or how teachers or adults take care of these kids that they're responsible for? Either one could go.
Okay, well, because that movie is so dear to me. I watched that, I think back in June or July. Wow. And I was like, oh my gosh, this has to go to Japan. That's why I was like,
that's so awesome.
I emailed them like without thinking, without even knowing. But I'm glad I did. And then in the process, I learned so much more, because when you translate, you really have to dig into each and every, and then I don't know how many times I watched that movie doing that.
Yeah.
So, and then interestingly enough, Gabor Mate, who is the main, person who talks about trauma, he has a book called Scattered Minds or something, that he says ADHD is a trauma response.
Oh.
And I don't think it's 100%, but when I was reading his book, it really made sense. That, and then it's been passed on for generations. And then it kind of makes sense, because when I do see a kiddo with that challenge, chances are one of their parents have the same challenge. And then a lot of parents get diagnosed after their kids are diagnosed. And then they start wondering like, oh, do I have it? And then they go through and they have it. And then now that they think about it, their parents, probably one of them, had it. So, it could be genetic, but it could be the trauma that keeps on going.
Generational trauma, they talked about that.
Right. And then it's a huge part of what I do, because I'm all about your mind as parents or caregivers is the keys to unlocking their potentials. Because when you come in, when you face them thinking that, oh my gosh, they can't do this, or, they have such challenges and they don't listen, they don't sit still, and they don't, like, what are we going to do? Then that is not a very safe energy that you are carrying. Like when you are thinking negative thoughts that, oh, there's something wrong with him, that they have a bigger antenna for what people around them are thinking, feeling. They do. I think they have a huge antenna for that. So whatever you're thinking, whatever your thoughts would get you into this physiological state of either safety or danger, in my opinion. And then they pick that up from a mile away. And that would, get them into a fear mode, because that's one of the things that we scan for. Like we always have a scanner going, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? And then we do that unconsciously. And then we look for our environment. Is there a tiger nearby? And then we look for what's inside. Like, am I hurting? Am I in pain? Am I hungry? And then are people around me feeling safe or, scared? Because chances are, if, a person next to me is scared, that means there's a tiger nearby.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening. Wow. And then when you think about that, when you think about how much your thoughts, your state of being affect them, then how much trauma you carry within you. Like in my speech, I talk about this, my relationship with my son, when, he likes to play games. And then I would, whenever I tell him like, oh, it's time to stop, then it becomes this daily daily argument. And then, he would roll his eyes on me, and then, oh my God, that would trigger me. And then I want to wring his neck, right? And then this goes on every single day. And then he's a teenager, and this was really destroying our relationship. And, it came to a point where I was like, this really has to stop. And as I was working through these things, I knew, some tricks to kind of dig deeper into myself to see what's really going on. And then when I did dig in, like, okay, what's really bothering me? What exactly is it? And then it turns out that I feel that I'm not heard, which is the belief that I've carried ever since I was 2.5. When I was 2.5, my little sister was born. And then from the beginning, she had some health issues, and she wasn't sleeping, she wasn't getting enough milk, all of that. And then my mom had to, work really, really hard to keep her healthy. Right. And I was 2.5, and I picked that up. And although she paid a lot of attention to my well-being, and then she told me that, she loved me, and then thank you for being so understanding and such a good girl. My mind, I made up this story that I have to be a good girl in order to be loved, all of that. So that was carried through me. And then I am not heard. I have to be a good girl. And then I have to be a nice person to be loved. So whenever my son would roll his eyes, that would trigger me. It's like my wound. And then it just attacks me. And my son's playing games had nothing to do with me losing it.
Yeah.
So sorry, it's long, but like everything that is not feeling good for you is related to your story. And when you think about that, the trauma on the kids, but on the trauma on the caregivers and parents and teachers.
Huge.
So yeah, that is a huge component, in my opinion.
One of the things that I remember Gabor Mate mentioned, he's a retired physician and now is doing all of this work. But he said, we asked the wrong question. We usually ask, what's wrong with you? Or what's wrong with him? What's wrong with her? So the real question is, what happened to him? Or what happened to her? Or what happened to them? And that was such a meaningful reframe for me. I work as a leadership coach and dealing with all different personalities, and some people are very sensitive to some things and others don't care less. And so all of us have a different response to different stimuli, right? Different stimulus. And it's been interesting to reframe, not that I necessarily work with people on a specific trauma. I don't, but I'm sure I bump up against stuff when things seem to be repetitive issues, or when people are particularly hurt or offended or angry or irritated about something. It could be linked to that. So it was fascinating. I watched 3 or 4 of the talks during that space. One about Indigenous people and the trauma that's carried from generations. Also one about gender identity and the impact that's also had, not only on the individuals that are identifying with a different gender than what perhaps they were born with, but also the families and the impact that has on the families or the society. And then I also watched one about incarceration. I mean, these are all this was not like light movie watching. No Pixar version of this. This is like hardcore. But Saundra, I want to hear from you a little bit, because I think you were dealing with other people's trauma, right? You are obviously you're a survivor. You're a survivor of all of these different events that happen in your life. And you had some grief and trauma counseling. What's been helpful about it? What have you learned about trauma for yourself in the process, or the process of grief? Anything you want to share with me?
Well, before I answer that question, you might have to remind me of the question.
That's fine. I'll come back to it. Go for it.
But one of the things that I was studying before the fire was, I'm in graduate school, and I was studying trauma in children. And what I'm trying to figure out is how to teach, how we should teach children who've been traumatized differently, specifically with, well, we should do it with all children, but I was specifically looking at English learners. A lot of times their trauma comes from coming into the what they were going through before they came to the United States, or the horrific trip that they had coming to the United States, which is often very dangerous, or something else that, you know, happened to them since they've been here. And I find that teaching children that have been traumatized, some of them do not want to tell you their story, but some of them do want to tell you the trauma story. And teachers are not trained to listen to them or respond to them in any way. It's not part of a training. So what I would love to do is kind of, I mean, I've kind of developed my own ways of hearing children's trauma stories and working with them so that they feel more safe at school and can talk about whatever they want to talk about, but it doesn't fit into the curriculum. And so that's what I was studying before the fire. And so of course, my brother died. I stopped, I was in a doctoral program, and I was getting ready to work on my dissertation. And that's what I really wanted to be about. And I think that either teacher training needs to be a little bit different, or they need to have teachers that specialize in working with those children in the buildings that know the different things that need to happen to have those kids feel successful. But like I said, the curriculum doesn't allow for that. You know? But I've been teaching full time since 1984. And I've heard, children who come from war-torn countries, or children that are coming from countries of conflict. You see that they're different, and that the regular things don't work with them. And one of the things that both teachers and parents have a tendency to do is to tell the child not to think about it anymore. They're having nightmares, they keep talking about it, and they say, just stop thinking about it. And if you know more about trauma, you know that doesn't happen. And there have to be ways in the schools that we can deal with this issue better. But first, we have to acknowledge that it's there. And we have to change our practices and maybe put the curriculum aside a little bit until the child is ready for school. Because there's so many other things going on. Not feeling safe takes you out of the game.
Totally.
We
can't learn that way.
We cannot. Or what you're learning is, through this filter of not feeling safe. So all these problems come, and we're like, why, we even sometimes treat the children like they're just ungrateful. You're here in the United States, we have all this money, all these resources, all this and all that, McDonald's, and you're unhappy, and you're causing trouble, or you're, getting into fights, and you're not wanting to come to school. Well, they're dealing with an awful lot. And we have to meet them where they are. And right now, that's not happening. So now, of course, once I had this, this big trauma in my life, everything that I read about trauma triggered it. So I had to put it aside for a while. But I hope to be getting back to it soon. And I hope to be able to have some kind of impact, at least on my classroom, on my work, on my job, with being able to be a place for these kids to come and help them, work through what they need to work through. But we need more help from school psychologists, or someone. I mean, I don't know that the position is there that we need right now, but maybe positions need to be created, maybe training needs to be created in schools to help these students, because they're definitely there, and their traumas are different than that kind of trauma from like living in a refugee camp is different from the kind of traumas that we usually look at with American children, which the trauma is coming from the family. But a lot of times with these other children, the trauma is coming from the environment, from the government, from gangs, from starvation.
Yeah, being
displacement. And even with my own family now, a lot of things that I've read and I've studied, I've seen them happen when you lose everything. And so it's very real to me now. A lot of things that I've read and have really presented themselves in a very real way in my life, whether it's been for me or for my mother or for somebody else in my family. And I see how disruptive it is in your life, and how waking up screaming every night, it affects everything. So the children need a lot of help, or we need to help them, but we don't have it down yet as to how to do it in the classroom. In the classroom is what I'm talking about. So that's something that I'm really very interested in and would like to learn more about. I didn't know about the wisdom of trauma, but I will definitely look into it.
I think you would love it, especially in light of everything you just shared and what you're committed to and what you see that there's a need. And there were a lot of different, I think there was an episode, I'll send you the link and I'll post it in the show notes too, but there was an episode around child rearing, I believe. And I don't know if it was specific to education or parenting, but I think that would be a really interesting one. It's funny because, so my mom, ever since she watched it recently, she asked, so Valerie, have you experienced any trauma when you were a child? I was just like, yes. Just like, what? I was like, but look, Mom, here's the thing. And I have, and I told her specifically one example. So my dad was very expressive when he got angry, raised his voice, was very menacing in his tone. And my mom was very conflict averse. And so she usually tried to pacify or just like blow it off and put a silver lining on it, right? So her style was a lot more, I would say maybe passive aggressive. My dad was aggressive, Mom was passive aggressive. I was just confused. And so my three brothers and I we all have our own stuff to deal with. But for me, I didn't realize until last year, just a year ago, how much anger I carried in my body. I used to have chronic back pain for years, on and off. And I did all sorts of things, massage, yoga, you name it. I went to this, 10 treatment session of Rolfing, like structural integration, like all of that deep tissue stuff. And so I'm glad I did that, because the gentleman that did it, he said, you have a lot of tension in your psoas muscle. Psoas is known as emotion muscle that carries emotion. I was like, okay, we'll just massage it. We'll straighten this out, right? And then towards the end of our session, he shared a book called The Mind-Body Connection by Dr. John Sarno. And I ended up reading the version that was specifically to healing back pain. And his connection is that we, basically, he didn't say the word trauma, as he didn't call it out particularly, but usually any of the back pain that's chronic is from some emotion, some kind of emotion that we're avoiding or something that we're not expressing. And I realized, it's in the particular case about back pain, it was about anger. And I was like, anger, me? Now you guys don't know me well, but I'm like, do I look like a person that carries a lot of anger? No. And I started asking friends and family, and they were just like, angry, Valerie? I mean, I've seen you frustrated or irritated, but I don't know if angry would be a word I use. And I'm like, that's a problem. I'm like, for 40 plus years of my life, none of my close friends and family could say that I've been angry about something. And there have been plenty of challenges in my life where I've had absolute right to be angry or express anger. And I buried it. I would rationalize it or just figure out a way to right inside in my body and my mind, I would sort it through, but I would carry it. I would never express it. So I went on an anger tour after I discovered that. And one of those, I talked to my older brother because I remember him specifically. I felt that he could have stepped up more when we were younger. That wasn't the story was he wasn't, he didn't act as an older brother when my dad would get upset and my mom wouldn't deal with it. And I felt like I had to be the one either to take the tension out of the room or do something. And my older brother was much more intellectual and introverted. So he would just go off and read a book or something. That's how I saw it. So I called him up after I discovered that. And I was like, hey, you know what? I'm angry at you. And he was like, okay. I explained, I just discovered this back pain I have is probably around some suppressed anger. And I think some of it was because I resented you for when dad was upset and angry and my mom wasn't dealing with that I had to be the one to say or do something to fix the home environment or stabilize things. And you would walk away. He was like, yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, I'm sorry. And I was like, yeah, me too. He goes, yeah, we all got a lot of work to do, don't we? I'm like, yep. I mean, it was like 10 minutes, boom, boom. And the back pain went away.
Wow.
Back pain went away.
I have I happen to have this book. It's really heavy. And it talks about all of the, emotions that's related to so it's
metaphysical anatomy. Okay.
It's really heavy. But yeah, according to this, I think back pain is lack of support.
And support, yeah.
Sense to you, right?
Total.
So yeah, amazing.
That is.
Cool.
All of that to say, I think all of us as adults are traumatized too. So it's no wonder that we're probably raising or not addressing traumatized children or traumatizing them unwittingly. What I did tell my mom after she asked me that is that, look, Mom, I can take responsibility for my role, the story I made up. It had nothing to do with you. I don't think you would have known. I certainly didn't when I was when I was young, what was going on or how resentful I felt about it or how I had this role that I felt I had to be responsible for managing the humor or tension in the room. I'm like, I don't know if I knew that. I took that on for whatever reason. But now I'm dealing with it. And I think our job as adults is to get really clear with what's going on over here.
Yeah.
Like what happened to me and how is that impacting how I'm responding to the situation, probably reacting to the situation. So anything else that you guys want to add about that? We're going to come close to our wrapping up here, but I want to hear any other thoughts you have or resources that would be helpful.
Well, I'm so excited about, Saundra, what she's all about. I mean, of course, you have to put that, off until you feel like you're ready. But when you are, and in your mom too, I am learning movements that would send you to your cortex, like, get you out of your fight or flight brain, which is right here.
Yeah.
And your brainstem, and then get more into your, thinking brain over here.
What movements? Tell us a movement.
Let's say there's one called thinking caps. It's from Brain Gym. And I am not with Brain Gym, but I am with a company called Brain Works. And they do an amazing job. And then sometimes they go out to schools and then they do some movements. And then the effect is just phenomenal.
Is there something you can show us now on screen?
Yeah, there's one called thinking caps. And so what you do is you get on your ears, both of your ears, and then you go from like the tip of your ears, and then you kind of uncurl the outer edge of your ears.
All the way down?
Yeah, all the way down.
All right, Sandra, you got to do it, Sandra.
She's got
I can't headset on. If I try to do it,
you can watch. And then when you get to your earlobe, you can kind of gently, pull, or because over here is acupressure point for brain. And then you do this again. And this time you go a little inward because your ears are full of acupressure point for all of your body. And then as you do this, you can have an intention like, I am present, or, I am calm, or, I am safe at school, if it's really true. And then you do this 3 times. And the third time you go even like deeper. And you just kind of massage your ears with your intention.
I feel more peaceful already.
Yes.
Okay.
This gets you out of fight or flight. And then there are, a whole other movements that would really calm you down. And then there are simple movements. And then, kids love to move rather than sitting still. And then there's one called
I'm watching. I'm trying to remember.
One called Lazy 8. And then you can do, the infinity sign. And then on both sides, or they can draw, or, they can use colored pencils or whatever. And then that like integrates both sides of the brain and then get ready for learning. And and then if you how you come into a room and then you don't remember why you came here, right? Do this. And then I usually do it on my palm or my
Lazy 8.
Lazy 8, and then it pops out.
Ooh.
And when I'm translating, sometimes I know the word, I know the perfect word that translates into Japanese, right? But I just can't have it. But if you have it in your brain somewhere, if you do this, you can remember it. I would say 95% of the time I remember.
That's cool.
Forget your ATM password or whatever.
What if I do it to someone else? Will they give me their password?
There you go. Like,
you have to watch your intention.
Oh man, I'm sure we could continue to peel back and pull out more and more conversation. This is really, really interesting. And I think obviously there's something to be shared. Both of you have selected topics to share with the world based on the trauma that you've experienced. So I don't want to take that for granted, that trauma is also here to teach. I think there's an opportunity once we learn, once we understand it, once we can see that its role and heal it, obviously, could also be a wonderful tool and vehicle for us to teach something, which the two of you have done so beautifully or in the process of. And I'll make sure to put your contact information out there for everybody who's interested in hearing more about your story, hearing more about the speech that you've crafted as a result of this experience. And now I want to turn the attention kind of inward into our experience today, and curious about, after now having had this conversation on the podcast and sharing what you've shared and hearing each other's stories, what are you taking away from our conversation today? Saundra, let's start with you, Saundra. Yeah.
Definitely want to learn more from Wakako. I'm familiar with Brain Gym, some of their ideas, not everything, but also there's so much that you can learn from people. There's so much you can learn from people that you just never expected to have those kinds of like the kind of connections that Wakako and I now share. Like I had no idea. And it's always the best idea to get to know people, ask them questions so that they feel comfortable enough to share things that are really deep with them. You're not going to get that out of just a hi, how are you, conversation. You have to have the intention of getting to know the person and wanting to make a connection with them.
100%.
So this has been a great experience for me. I've learned a lot, even though one thing I learned is don't wear a headset.
You missed that on our brainstem today.
Do it as soon as I take them off. and my earrings off.
Okay.
But Yeah, it was a great experience, and I'm really glad that I did it. And I'm really glad I had this opportunity to get to know both of you better.
That's so cool. Thank you, Sandra. I'm glad that you're walking away with that this fulfilled the expectation when you said yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Wakako, what about for you?
Yes,
Taking-
pretty much the same thing. I didn't know all these things about Sandra and you, and I didn't think the conversation would go this way, right? And it's just amazing. All you need is to ask questions.
Mm,
And sometimes it doesn't feel comfortable,
yeah.
but when you do, all kinds of things show up, and it's just beautiful. I had so much fun. I showed up all nervous, but now I'm just having fun. Thank you, Valerie. This has been great.
Fantastic. I'm curious about what were you most nervous about, or what during our conversation did you feel most on edge about for either of you?
When I was talking about my experience, because I don't do that very often.
Yeah. And I want to ask one more question about that, Wakako. So why don't you talk about it more often? What stopped you?
I think not everybody's ready to hear it. And also that I'm not sure if I can keep my composure. I broke out when you asked me, but
It's
today
tears,
I
you mean,
was
yeah.
ready for it. Right.
Not an allergic reaction. You had tears. You
Yeah.
broke out. Yeah. Into
Right.
tears. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's sad. It is, because it's very painful.
Mhm.
Every time I love talking about my son. I love talking about my brother, but it also takes me back to that very painful and difficult time every single time.
Yeah.
And it's not like, you have a pass and, you can go 10 times and then it stops. It seems to be limitless to what can take you back to that pain and how many times you can go even in one day. So I think that just part is trying to stay sane and protect yourself. You have to kind of not have, you don't stop thinking about it, but not have it right on the tip of your tongue all the time. But at the same time, if you don't talk about it, people won't learn what you have to share with them, if they want to learn it. And there's a lot of people who have suffered, have losses from COVID. So many people all around the world, and very few people that I know talk about it. I do have some very good friends who've shared with me about their COVID losses, but it's something about COVID. I don't know what it is that people don't talk about it.
There's some shame.
And
yeah.
I don't know why though. I don't know why there would be any feeling of anything other than loss about it, but people are not talking about it with each other, and we really need to support them. When you think about how many COVID deaths there have been and how many long haulers there are, people that survive COVID, but they're still having severe issues, physical issues, we all need to get together and help each other and support each other and ask people, how can I help you, and mean it and do it. And then that also means for me, if someone says, well, how can I help you? If there's something that they can actually do to help me, I need to say what it is that I need. And I wasn't always good at asking for help or articulating, something that another person could do that would actually bring me comfort or make it a little bit easier for me in that moment.
Oh, I totally hear that. My two younger brothers both have COVID, both have had one a couple of months ago, and his twin just a week ago, because I think his quarantine ended today. One was vaccinated, one was not. And what was interesting is that as a nuclear family, we talked about it, obviously, and they talked about it with their spouses and kids. And the younger kids did get it as well. 3 of them were tested positive, although very little symptom. But what was fascinating is when we talked about sharing it with our greater family or friends, they were like, no, there's something about talking about it that either gives people the impression, or that's what we were saying, that for some people the impression or the idea that people weren't being responsible, or that you were, is it real or is it not? There were too many add-ons to basic health. Like, there was so much meaning added to being ill or not being ill, or being diagnosed positive or not, that it was not worth the conversation with others. It was like, I prefer to just get better. I was like, that's fair. That is fair. And I would hope that, I think the same goes for trauma. There's so much shame, and that some of us withhold or avoid talking about it, or asking questions about it, or keeping the space open enough for people to share. And I think that's the next frontier for us as human beings, is how safe can we make it for other people to express and share traumatic things with us, or at least anything that might be impacting the relationship, or impacting their performance, or impacting the environment in ways that could support healing. I don't think that if you don't talk about it, we don't heal. And I, a very practical example, I injured my Achilles tendon playing tennis several months ago, and I was just going to heal it on my own. So I stopped playing tennis for a while, obviously, because I just couldn't. I mean, it was on the extreme end, I couldn't walk for like 3 days. I had to use crutches to move around because it was so painful. But I knew it wasn't torn or anything like that. I decided to do a lot of self-care, then started playing tennis again, but I noticed it was still a little bit tight. And I thought, okay, let me go to my massage therapist and get some deep tissue massage in there. And he said, Valerie, you know how much scar tissue is here? And I mean, there were places where I was like, how is the scar tissue up that high? It's like, because you've been compensating. Right. Your body's been compensating for your gait, for how you walk, for your, for posture, all sorts of things. And it was painful as he was working through some of the scar tissue. But I realized that I was much more committed to having freedom and flexibility in order to enjoy my life, rather than continue to compensate. And I think the conversation we had today was really about giving others the freedom to address trauma in ways that could free them, and really openly not only express it, but also heal it. If we're not healing it, if we're just dealing with symptoms, or if we're not creating a space where people have permission to share or talk about it, it could infringe on how people move in the world, and how well they perform, or how well they communicate, or how well they're able to, be, how resilient they are. And so anyway, that was a long way of saying thank you for sharing today. I'm so happy that you guys were both comfortable enough to share with me and share with others that are listening and watching this. Now, any final words before we wrap up for our session?
Well, I wanted to just speak to a couple of things that you mentioned. My son was not careless. He wasn't vaccinated because the vaccine wasn't out yet, but he was not careless. He was a very healthy person. He did have, one other problem, but it was new. He didn't even know he had it. And he was living with my mom, and we talked very openly and honestly about what everybody who had anything to do with my mother had to do to keep her from getting COVID. Because clearly, as an elderly person, that probably would have been devastating for her. But he did what he was, he did the things that he wanted to do, that he was supposed to do. And protecting my mother was very, very high on his list of things to do. And even after he got COVID, and we didn't know, for a while, we didn't know he had it. But he, even when he was sharing an apartment with my mother, he didn't give it to her. She didn't catch it from him. It's really, really very conscientious. And so I think that it's an illness, it's a virus, and there's no shame in getting it. And he didn't want a whole lot of attention either. I was the one that was putting the attention on him, but it was to make sure that he was okay, that he had enough to drink, that he was hydrated, that he was eating. You know, I had people go and check them because I'm in a very high risk category, so I couldn't really get near him. But I, sent people over there and checked on them every day. And that is really important. Like, even if that person, especially young people, especially millennials, they don't want a whole lot of, fuss about stuff. But you got to pay attention. Like, one of the things I did was I sent a pulse oximeter over to him. And I said, and you use this, this hour, and you write down what the numbers are. And when I call you, I want to know those numbers. And that is when he knew that he needed help and when he needed to go to the emergency room. So,
sounds like a responsible, he definitely took that from you, taking care of other people, being responsible, being the caretaker and provider. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Wakako, any final?
Oh, thank you. And it's been a pleasure talking to you and getting to know you two better. And I can't wait to talk a lot more.
There's more. Very good. And if there are any other resources about ADHD or about COVID or about advocacy or about any of the things that you all are passionate about and you study that you'd like for me to share, I'll make sure to add that to the show notes so people have access to those as well. And I'll put in information about the wisdom of trauma, so I think is a worthwhile watch. Good. Okay. Thank you so much, the two of you, for sharing once again. My pleasure. And for those of you who tuned into this episode of Not Quite Strangers, thanks again for tuning in. I'm so excited that you have the opportunity to learn something new or perhaps see things from a different perspective. And I hope that you subscribe. Go to www.notquitestrangers.com so that you have access to every single episode, including this one. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of the day, everyone. Bye.
You've been listening to the podcast Not Quite Strangers. Be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite video or podcast platform. And for more information and content, go to notquitestrangers.com. See you next time.